Good afternoon, everyone. All right. Hey, my name is Gary Hughes, and I am the director at Chesterfield Colonial Heights and immediate past president for VCCJA. Today I have two roles in this piece. I am the moderator for conference purposes. So what that means is very soon you'll see an evaluation being passed around. The conference committee reviews all the evaluations. We take those very seriously, and we'll be waiting at those doors at the end of this session to collect those evaluations. So please, please, please fill out those forms. And that concludes most of my formal role from that aspect. The next aspect will be moderating our panel today. So today we're talking about advancing pretrial systems in Virginia on the local and state level. So Virginia has a rich collaborative history of advancing pretrial justice. The last 18 months, that history and the rich collaboration has taken those efforts of advancing pretrial justice to a new level. During the past 18 months, there have been 3 pilot sites working on an implementation process for the public safety assessment. Those 3 sites, Prince William County, Prince William Criminal Justice Services, Blue Ridge Court Services, and the City of Richmond Adult Justice Services. Today, we have representatives from 2 of those pilot sites. We also have a representative from the Department of Criminal Justice Services. I mentioned collaboration, right? And I mentioned that we have a rich history of collaboration and advancing pretrial justice. So that collaboration is with our partners at the Department of Criminal Justice Services. So that's the state level. So we have the local level, we have the state level. We have the national level involved with this, with APPR, Advancing Pretrial Policy and Research. Rich collaboration. So what you're going to hear today, it's what's been going on the past 18 months. You're going to hear some of the why. You're going to hear some of the future. After I introduce the panelists, you're going to hear a presentation with a little bit laying that groundwork for where we've been and why we're doing this. We're then going to have a Q&A. This is a structured Q&A with the panelists that I'll be facilitating. We will do that. Then we're going to have a Q&A where all of you can ask questions. We do ask that you hold your questions back until we have the formal process. So, as you're hearing the presentations and you're hearing that structured panel today, if questions come to your mind, please write them down, put them in notes in your phone, tell a friend, but we want your questions. And then after that session, you're going to hear next steps in Virginia as we further advance pretrial justice and we take it to another level. So my next steps right now, I want to introduce our panel. We have Steve Austin. Steve's the director for Prince William Criminal Justice Services. Steve's also a past president of VCCJA. We have Tamadri Thomas. She's a deputy director for Prince William Criminal Justice Services. She's your current VCCJA president. We have Megan Roan. She's the director at Blue Ridge Court Services, a longtime executive committee member in multiple roles. So these are our 2 local agencies, including Samantha Honig. Samantha is the pretrial program manager at Blue Ridge Court Services. So they represent those 2 agencies at the local level. They're going to talk to you about this implementation process that's been happening for the past 18 months. Last but definitely not least is Wes Smallwood. So Wes is the pretrial services coordinator for the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. Wes has taken over that role this year. Wes has a long history with VCCJA in the field. He was a pretrial and program manager for OAR in Charlottesville. Wes was the departing chair and co-chair of the Pretrial Justice Advancement Committee. His co-chair, by the way, was Samantha Honig right there. So we have a wealth of expertise today who are going to talk to you about where we've been, introduce this implementation process, and again, my focus is on Virginia's history is a rich collaborative process. We bring it in at the local level, the state level, and the national level. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Wes Smallwood.
Thank you, Gary. So before we get into the where we are and where we're heading, he mentions that rich history of collaboration and partnership, and that's what we're going to look at first before we go into the actual panel conversation. So what we have here is we're going to share a presentation with you guys of the overview of where we have been with pretrial assessment in Virginia, where we are today, and then we were going to talk about what that's going to look like for us moving forward. So let's get started by seeing, first and foremost, the first place we have to look is, what does the code say we need to do? And when I say we, what is DCJS's role as it relates to the code? So we have a codified duty to develop a risk assessment instrument that is used by you guys in the field as a pretrial services agency to help those judicial officers make informed decisions, whether with considering how much of a risk to public safety does an individual face, and then what is their likelihood to appear in court. So those are the codified duties, and you see the code up on the screen here. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at how we've approached that through the years. 1995. How many of us in this room were not even on planet Earth in 1995? We got some youngins. Yes. All right. So, yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So, yeah, right. So this all started in 1995 with the implementation of the Comprehensive Community Corrections Act and the Pretrial Services Act. First grant applications went out. You guys, your experience with grant application process from the state, getting your local funding secured, all of that began back in 1995. So from that point forward, we look into 1999 to 2005. That's when the development of the Virginia Pretrial Risk Assessment Instrument, that process played out. And that gives us what we have today in a form of the VPRE. We know that as VPRE. It's commonly referred to that. So in that time, we also had a few other things happening in the field. The first iteration of the concepts of evidence-based practices. I think in 2004, the first 4 sites were selected for that process, then expanded to 10 additional sites, I think in that same calendar year. And then through that time, you're implementing the VPRE, okay? So PTCC, you know, our wonderful database that exists, right? That happened on a mandated level across the state in 2005. So you have all those things happening together and in the background, and then you're implementing that in the field with your localities, with these judges, helping to inform those judicial officers. Around 2009, we have our first validation of the tool itself. Is it making impact the way it's supposed to? Is it working as intended? We validated that tool in 2009 and then again in 2010. So during this time, with EBP also now expanding to additional localities across the state, there was a large amount of information that was being considered across jail boards, across VCCJA committees, DCJS partnerships, looking at how we are doing business. What is the VPRE risk assessment? What is it having an impact in? And so things started to, that collaboration and partnership really ratcheted up in the 2010s. And from 2010 until I guess the next point that I'm about to show, in 2015, we validate again, but between that time, you have studies like, I think an annual report, the October studies, which starts with the jail board. It's really looking at release decisions, how length of stay, how long individuals are in custody, the outcomes of those individuals for the first time, beginning to look at these things. A tremendous symposium was held in 2014. Anyone remember that? The Criminal Justice Symposium down in Richmond. A large culmination of hard work and effort from the field, from VCCJA as your association, and partnership with the state and with DCJS, but also really key stakeholders across the state, and even on a national level, even for that. We had national speakers, some of which I think might be in the room today. And that led into 2015's validation, again, of the tool and a development of a decision-making framework, which is an additional tool alongside the VPRE that we know as the Praxis. So the first iteration of Praxis came out in 2015. We implemented that in a piloted way as well with Praxis sites and then non-Praxis sites, testing that first iteration. Changes were made, implementation, it was tested for another year or so, and in 2016 and into 2017, changes were made to the VPRE, and we now have the VPRE R, which is what exists today. We have the Praxis edition, which is implemented statewide in 2017, which is what we have today. Changes were made to the tool. It still had, the original tool had 3 levels of supervision. So once we've assessed this individual of what their outcome likelihood could be, the praxis sort of integrated the concept of how do we then manage the outcomes with that individual? What is the strategies that we take with supervising or managing their success or outcomes? And so we have a first iteration of risk-informed supervision. So we used to call it differential supervision. It's now, concept of being risk-informed about who we have on supervision and how we are handling them in the community. Risk-informed meaning as their scores increase and the severity of the charge, their levels would be assigned in that way. So having that clear-cut concept was introduced in and is what we have today. So let's skip this a little bit. We're going to jump here. So at that same time, around 2017 and leading into 2018, we had a pivotal moment in our world with a crime commission study that began to look at our pretrial data project. It's what's now known as the pretrial data project, but the initial crime commission study was really taking a hard look at the pretrial system in and of itself, heavily involving with pretrial services. So things that really, started seeing over time was we were having difficulties with the concept of universal screening. And what does that mean? It means equal application of our ability to do our judicial duties and legislative duties to investigate those who are remaining detained, needing to help that judicial officer make those informed decisions. How well are we able to do that? And so as you can sort of see here, over time we've had a struggle with that. The Crime Commission served to highlight that point as well. And so in about 2018, from that point forward, we really started back into looking and examining how we are conducting business and what ways can we improve upon an already long-standing practice of investigating individuals, informing judicial officers' decision-making, and yet we also realized that there were some challenges that we faced in order to do that, and to do that in a way that was applicable and equitable to all that needed to have that same assessment tool applied to their case. So here we are in 2019. We really, when I say we now, we're talking we, VCCJA and PJAC. That's the we I'm referring to in this case. That committee really took a hard look at how are we able to improve upon this system? What could we do? What exists out there? The same time, so in 2019, we took a nice trip, VCCJA, with DCJS members as well, to New Jersey, looked at a lot of the system changes they had impacted and implemented there in their state with the adoption of the PSA tool and sweeping system reform in their state. Brought back a lot of vital information, continue to explore the PSA as a tool. What is it? How does it compare to the VPRE? Because at the same time, VPRE, as we've implemented it, it was the first statewide research-based tool ever in the nation. And that tool in and of itself and our model has been applied in other states. So we know we are pioneers. Virginia has been a pioneer historically in this work. And that's what we're going to continue to be as we continue to move into the next evolution of assessment in pretrial. And so that's where we are today. We're here. We kicked off in 2021. The decision was made collaboratively in partnership to continue to pursue this project. The application went in for our 3 sites to be included for the Advancing Pretrial Policy and Research Learning Site project. And that's where our folks from APPR and Dr. Banks is here and is going to be doing a lot of workshops for us in this conference. So please take advantage of the opportunity to learn from those national experts as well. And the partnerships there allowed us to then begin our kickoff project in 2022. So, and now here we are today, and this fine crew is going to be able to showcase the hard work that they've put in, the countless hours, countless meetings, collaborative work with their local stakeholders, and then across the state. And so that's where we're shifting now to our conversation. And I think this is where we're going to start the Q&A panel about where we are heading and what we've done so far in this project and what that's going to look like moving forward for the rest of us. So, Gary, I think I'm back to you now.
Thank you, Wes. Greatly appreciated. So I'm going to start off with a question. This is first for our 4 local participants, and then Wes, I'll have a follow-up for you later, okay? So the perception of this project has focused on the public safety assessment, but it's really more than that. Why does this project focus on implementation from a system perspective, and what has this experience been like for you and your team? Who'd like to start that off?
So for us in Prince William, from assistance perspective, really this is about improving the whole local criminal justice system at the pretrial stage. And so we've been pretty fortunate, and actually all 3 pilot sites were involved with an initiative with the National Institute of Corrections called evidence-based decision making. That was around 2014, 15, 16. OAR Charlottesville was one of the original sites, and then we did a statewide implementation. So that really started our system work in our areas, and that really did make a difference because, you know, improving the system is really what this initiative is about. And for our team, there was already those established relationships already. So this was an opportunity to build upon that and to get engagement. So there was lots of things that you'll hear that we did to get ready for that. The initiative itself, the PSA initiative, really involves the work, we get technical assistance from APPR. We all have a technical assistance provider. Mike Jones and Dr. Calvin Banks are 2 providers. Our team had Dr. Banks, who's here today, and they worked with us to help us look at our system from a very critical lens, to be very inclusive, to have all the critical stakeholders there, which we have done before, so it wasn't new to us. But that doesn't mean that it can't be done easily in other places as well, because you all have established criminal justice boards, CCJBs, and other stakeholder groups that do this good collaborative work. So that, for us, was the key to getting the initiative started, was to use our existing stakeholder teams, our existing successes, and building upon that, but really be laser focused on the pretrial justice end of things. Previously, EBDM was really systemic, looked at the whole system from the time someone is involved in an arrest or a summons issue to the time they get discharged to reentry. You know, if that happens, with, of course, people can drop off at any point. This was laser focused just on the pretrial end of things. So it's enabled us to see our collaborative efforts, and it's allowed us to work together in a way that we see where our pain points are, and also the areas that we successfully made strides. So we did a system mapping as part of the initial process, and where we looked at how cases flow through the system. It allowed us an opportunity to look at our gaps as well as the areas that we're doing really well at. And we were really surprised really as to how much work had been done in the pretrial system since we started EBDM in, like I said, 2014, 2015 timeframe, and that we were doing much more at the different intercept points, a lot more work done with people that are involved with mental illness and engaged with the criminal justice system. Huge amount of work has been done. CIT, crisis assessment centers, co-responder units, all of these things are well-established collaborations that have happened. So this has enabled us to work better as a system, look at the data, share the data with stakeholders, and get their engagement at that level. And in our experience, it's been really, really positive in that we also engaged with stakeholders we hadn't necessarily in the past, meaning some community stakeholders and some impacted individuals from the system, which has been prevalent on the state team in particular. And that has really helped us to open our eyes up to see what the pretrial system does positively and negatively from that lens as well. So, and I'm sure others have things to say.
I was just going to follow up with different perspectives. One I didn't think would really have an impact, but it has been actually quite, they've been the most enthusiastic participants is we've invited clerks, clerks from the courts that we work with on a daily basis. They provide a perspective, and they also are a major point to the efficiency of everything that we do. And they're happy to be asked, and they have a lot of great ideas to make this, your post-project, post-PSA implementation, you're able to kind of get their words and ideas on how to make everything more efficient, even when it comes to just KPS letters or show cause letters or getting bond paperwork, things that could really kind of, gunk up the works. You have the people that you don't normally get asked what their opinion is to participate, and I think they really enjoy it. For one, they like to be asked, and they also, you realize how needed they are in having a good, efficient system.
So the only thing I will add is, speaking of the mapping, it has been so nice to have everyone at the table. From, like Sam said, the clerks, the magistrates, public defenders, from all across the system, we have folks at the table, judges. So, it definitely goes beyond the public safety assessment. It's amazing, once we heard everybody walk through the mapping process, it's amazing what else has come up from around the table, whether it's paperwork, whether it's violations, and how to process that. So I would definitely say that it's definitely been super beneficial. There have been things that we've complained about for years, and until you have everybody at the table, it's really cool to be able to talk about it and to be able to feel like you're making progress. So there's definitely a lot more that's going to come out of this. I can speak for Blue Ridge Court Services. Other than just the PSA implementation, there are definitely other things that we are going to be looking at.
So again, we have two teams. We have the local team, we have the state team, which is headed by Wes. So Wes, how has this same approach looked at the state level?
Yeah, so it mirrors really in structure the local teams with system involvement from folks from the OES, Office of Executive Secretary, Indigent Defense, that's your public defender's office, your prosecutors across the states. You also have magistrates at the table, the chief magistrates from there as well, community advocates, system-involved individuals, and just to be very, very candid with you, if we are talking about change in a system without involving people who have been impacted in the system, then I think we are missing a big mark on that. I can tell you in those state team conversations, the perspective that individual shares with us, his name is Christopher Rashad Green, who's been involved in a lot of our conversations state team-wide and in the national level, getting out and about in the field. His perspective on what his experience was like is vital for us. And so that participation from him and all the other system players very much mirrors what these guys are doing locally. And these guys are also on the state team, and bringing their local perspective and their work that they are doing to the state team when we have these meetings with all those system players, that they can see the work that it is taking, what would be needed in order to implement these things locally and then broader across the state when the time comes for that. That is what the state team is structured as and how it has functioned up to this point. And some of the things, we have subcommittees within the state team as well. So we've had a data committee, a Virginia offense list or violent offense list subcommittee, as well as a legal subcommittee. So all of those members across the system impacting how, first, again, looking at the law, legal team, what impacts and what do we have to do? What are the ramifications of making any sort of change with this? The data, obviously, being able to measure your performance and outcomes with any change in the system, as well as your current system. How are we monitoring and being able to showcase the work that we're doing and making the impacts that we're having? So that data team really working on that performance measures across system impact. Again, this is not just about pretrial services agencies and a tool specifically, but this is how do we, as a pretrial services agency, in the parts that we play, what is the impact that we can have to the system itself? And that's been a vital part, hearing from these guys every month or so, how often we have met over the last year and a half. Their experiences coupled with the experiences and sometimes, misunderstandings of some of the preconceived notions of what you do as a pretrial services agency. And judges on board with that, listening and hearing the things that are happening in our system on a day-to-day basis and being able to talk through those things together and finding a way forward has been a really awesome thing to see from my perspective, and then to see these guys doing that as well on a local level.
Thank you. So we've heard so far a lot about the individual agencies. We've heard a lot about the importance of system. So the next question is going to be one of the most important components or factors for any implementation is how well your key stakeholders collaborate, how well they embrace this opportunity, how do they adjust to change and resulting changes perhaps to policies and procedures. We know that factor is key. And we heard a little bit of talk so far about stakeholders. And I know one of the things I'm very interested in is how did you engage your stakeholders? And how are these conversations going? So we'd like to hear from the local participants first.
Yes, so this is a very key component of this process. And one of the things that was important at the beginning was establishing a leadership team within each pilot site. That leadership team in Prince William County was, at the local level, is myself and Steve. We are considered team leads. And then we have a judge, one of our chief judges, the General District Court chief judge, and we have the chief public defender, who are the team champions. So in asking them to join, you know, of course, with them, they carry more influence, the judge and the chief public defender, than we would, you know, at times, especially with their peers, with the attorneys, the judges, the Commonwealth attorneys, the defense attorneys. And so we've asked them, a part of this process was that we asked them to please champion, you know, what we discuss, especially with those folks who are a little resistant. You know, I mean, it's change. This is going to be a major change. And the energy, you know, just having them on board and having them back us and support us and what we're doing and helping drive this initiative has been amazing to see. You know, in our locality, we typically do meet with our, for instance, juvenile and domestic relations court judges maybe once or twice a year just to check in. But since we've started this process, and one of the gaps that we identified during the mapping was that we as a locality need to maybe do more with enhancing DV, or domestic violence and intimate partner violence supervision, and offer more resources and things of that nature. So with that as an identified gap, we've been invited to every quarterly meeting, it seems, since this process has begun. They want to hear from us. They want to hear what we've been doing. They want to hear, even though they do have a representative on the policy team, because there's also a policy team at each locality. But they've invited us with open arms, and they're interested, you know, and engaged, and that is so important to this process because, again, anybody could implement a new tool tomorrow, you know, just say, hey, this is what we're going to do. But it's not about a tool. It's about we have to get buy-in. We have to work, you know, to improve the system. We have to identify gaps in the system, have conversations, build rapport, build trust amongst those who are going to be utilizing the tool, and it's going to be a big change. So, anyone else? You good?
So I do have a quick follow-up. So from my perspective, I'm just interested in, do you have any advice? You know, with any implementation, it's not a straight line up. There's going to be resistance. Do you have any examples of where you may have encountered some resistance and what you did to counter that resistance?
I don't know that we have seen some, but I think that remains to be seen because just so everyone knows, we've not fully implemented the tool yet. We're building up to it. So I think part of reducing resistance is being transparent and informed and having the conversations, not keeping things a mystery. So, and it's good to have like the TA provider, Calvin has helped us, you know, to remind us we need to be having the conversations about this. So we've done presentations not only to our Community Criminal Justice Board, but we've gone to the judges at different levels. We've had a conversation with the Commonwealth Attorney. We've had conversations with the public defender, so they all know it's coming, so it takes the mystery out of it. And also don't forget, you know, we're talking to our staff. They're going to be the ones doing the implementation. And sometimes that gets lost when you start a new initiative. And I know for me at the level I'm at, you know, which is, you know, at the policy level, it's easy to not engage at that. And of course, it's a strategy too, when to engage with your staff, because sometimes they don't want to hear things because it's not being implemented yet and it can be too far out. So we've been trying to inform them all along the way, but now that we're getting closer, they're getting more specific, not so much the actual training itself. No one gets training until right before implementation. We haven't even trained stakeholders yet. That'll be just, a few weeks because of, the retention of the information. So some of the other resistance, though, that we were concerned about, but I think it's going to be okay, because one, having trust and that they trust you makes a big difference, and I do feel like that we have that. And again, I'll take that back to all the work we've been doing over the years, is that there's trust. But it's just a process, I think, where you've got to have, give them the information as you have it. But there is, I think, some concern, we thought, about not doing a recommendation for release or detain, because that's a big change with this instrument. And this may be news to some of you all here. We make recommendations, release, detain. The responsible use of this tool, does not advocate for using it in that way. It's really to inform conditions of release should the court choose to make a release decision. The court has the power to make that release decision based on the Code of Virginia. So we're encouraging them to consider the code when making that release or detain decision. We're going to provide you recommendations for conditions to assure appearance and assure public safety in the interim. So that is a big switch. There was a little resistance from that to the bigger stakeholder groups. There was some angst, admittedly, because it's become kind of they expect pretrial to make a recommendation. And so we're working through that, but because we're having the conversations way in advance of implementation, they all know it's not going to be having cold water thrown on them when it happens. They know it's coming, and I think they're beginning to get more comfortable with it. And I think the stakeholders are kind of looking forward to it. And I'm happy to put our staff out of that role. I don't know that that was ever the right place for us to be, but that's where we were with VPRE.
I know that when we first approached the stakeholders in doing this project, one of the first reactions they had was, well, what's wrong with the VPRE? So immediately there's this level of distrust as to, well, what have we been doing all these years? Why do you have to change it? And I think when it comes down to implementing it in your own locality, and then the staff's going to go out and go into the public, go to court, go talk with attorneys, and they're going to probably get asked the same question. And to help them smooth it over, the why is so that everybody can have a risk assessment and actually have a bond decision be made by a risk assessment. So that is the main why, and that satisfied our stakeholders as to why we're getting rid of something they've relied on for so many years to try something new, is because not everybody was it wasn't fair for everybody. So that was helpful.
Sure. And so, Wes, from the state perspective, the official kickoff was in 2022. So we're here. It's a year later. So can you tell us about the journey so far from the state perspective?
Yeah, so much like what these guys have already mentioned, those same sort of questions. Why change risk assessments? What are we, VPRE has existed for a long time now. And so those conversations with our state team players and partners have allowed us to have the opportunity to talk this through. Understanding that this is the natural evolution of what we have historically already accomplished and done. Through those validations and the revision of the VPRE, what is the VPRE today is not what was implemented back in 2005. What we see with the praxis today is not what was implemented for the first time when we tested that. Over time, what we are doing and why we are doing this is to make the most impact across the entire system, which is what this group at VCCJ has always been trying to push towards, right? Like advancing that pretrial justice concept to make the system in Virginia in a pretrial way the most just and effective system as we possibly can. And so it's a natural tendency to look back and reflect on being very loyal and tied to a particular thing that we all piloted as a state. We developed that. And there's questions about that, right? So why go ahead? Well, Sam mentioned not having universal screening. I mentioned it earlier. The need and reliance on an interview by the VPRE does pose barriers for you guys to do that with each individual. That's a natural barrier. It also is an opportunity to help inform as many decisions as early as possible in that first appearance, that initial appearance in court, to help that judicial officer feel more comfortable by making that decision because they have that information right there and then in front of them, instead of have to wait to a formal bond hearing. And so that is also another draw for this tool and the approaches to that. And then I think the long-term goal and the pie in the sky change that we would see to make it actually the most informed at the earliest entry point would be at the magistrate level. And so this is a tool that doesn't require an interview to be done, and they, at that point, at magistrate level, the opportunity exists for this tool to be adopted into that same decision-making point. And so those are some of the goals that we have overall from the state perspective and how we've approached that in the implementation process.
Great, thank you. So this next question is for all the panelists. So it has been said that when it comes to any successful implementation, that culture is king. So given that, can you give us or enlighten us a little bit on why is culture so important to each of you? And then what have you done to enhance your culture before this implementation process and during this implementation process? That's an expression, and you go to leadership trainings, culture is king. That's what you hear. So can you enlighten us with some specific examples, again, of how you are addressing and enhancing organizational culture?
I guess it's me. Sure. Culture is key. It's very important. Prior to this process, we have always surveyed our staff, for instance. I'm talking internally first, to see what their thoughts are about how we're doing. Are we providing them what they need as far as their professional growth and development, as far as their jobs are concerned? Are they being able to get the appropriate training to do their job? Do they have the appropriate resources? All of that, we do that every year, and that is tied into the manager's evaluations based on, or leadership evaluations based on their input. So that's one thing. And then we also allow them a space. We have joint staff meetings quarterly where we allow folks a space to speak up, tell us how they think things are going, ask questions. And this has continued through this process as we've been giving them bits and pieces at a time, like Steve mentioned, incrementally telling them more and more about this process, because we don't want to overwhelm people. But giving them the space to, ask questions freely. It's okay if you don't like this decision that is being made, because we are being told that this, even though we're pilot sites, this isn't a traditional pilot. We're definitely going to implement this across the state of Virginia. And of course, once again, we could tell people this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it, but that's not how we know a best practice is not to just dictate and tell people what to do. We want to include them in the process, get suggestions about how to implement new and innovative ideas. And this has been our practice prior to this, so it has carried over. And we also always try to lean on why we're doing something, give them the reason why, which is very important. Always take them back to our vision and mission within our agency as well. It's not about how we feel about this change, it's about why are we making this change. It's for the greater good. And we also have other things in place, such as they're called extended leadership meetings, where they, we invite, I think it's quarterly, we invite our staff to our team leader meetings to bring suggestions, include them in every decision that, we can include them in within the agency. Again, this wasn't a decision that we per se had a stake in. We were pretty much told, this is the best practice, so we're going to do this. But we give them a forum to meet with leadership. They come with questions. They come already prepared. There's like one individual per team that comes quarterly and says, hey, can we do something different with this? This process, can we change this process? Because we see that it'll be more helpful and streamline things within the agency. And a lot of times we do, changes made because of those suggestions. So empowering people, along the way, or staff along the way, including them, having having conversations, being transparent as much as we can possibly be is key.
So I'm just gonna kind of steal what others have said. But Sam really hit on something that's huge when you're thinking about culture. And Steve also said, you can't communicate with everyone and leave staff out. It has to, I am a firm believer that it has to start within your office. That's where the culture has to begin. These are the folks that are gonna be going into court, that are gonna be going into the jails. So there has to be a trust. And I think that a lot of times that trust comes around the communication. Again, this isn't anything secretive. Sam and I, we actually invite staff to the Blue Ridge Criminal Justice Board meetings. The more people can hear, the more that they hear what's going on. I think that really helps with that trust level. That way we're all on the same page when this rolls out. And again, they are the ones that are going to be answering the questions of the judges and the attorneys in court. So I definitely think that office morale and the trust and respect, the culture within your office is huge when you go to implement anything.
Okay, thank you all. Next question. Any implementation effort will have challenges. What has been the most difficult challenge you faced so far with implementation? And what was your approach to overcome the challenge? Most difficult challenge.
I think the most, and it was probably easier for a smaller rural locality like ours is, but trying to gather all the stakeholders together at any given time and actually set up meetings that have on a recurring basis. So you have judges, you have people who have important schedules that keep a system going, and you're trying to get them to stop everything for 2 hours a month and talk about the system that they're trying to work in. And so that was definitely difficult. So when it comes to the next localities that are going to be able to do this, if you're thinking about what can I do to kind of help, be proactive in trying to kind of, grease the wheels, so to speak, that would be to really think, are the stakeholders in my area, do I know them well? Do you have, like as far as a criminal justice board that you meet quarterly in your area, is that something that is it attended well? Do you have just a good relationship with the people that are in your criminal justice community? If you don't, or if you don't know their names, or if there's been resistance in the past, I would just start buying them donuts or something. I don't know, but if you have a good working criminal justice system or a criminal justice board, I know Megan, she gets the snack. It's a very prepared event quarterly, and it's well attended. We have a really good criminal justice board with a lot of good people that within the criminal justice community in our area that really they're good participants. They work well with each other. So if you have that ahead of time, this will be a whole lot easier and a smoother process to implement.
And so I may echo a couple of things that Sam said, but I was at this point, again, since we're not fully implemented, there may be bigger challenges ahead, but the time and the commitment, when we signed up, we did volunteer kind of, sort of, for this. We were approached and said, we think, because of what you've done as an organization in the past, that's why they picked us. But the time, you had to make some serious commitments. There was some things you signed. There was commitment letters you had to receive. At least this is how the pilot phase was from the stakeholders. And it wasn't form letters. It wasn't it was specific to what it meant to that particular stakeholder. So that meant some pretty good outreach with everybody involved in the initiative, which is pretty much all the criminal justice stakeholders and beyond. And so that was a big part of it, to let them know that this is a commitment, and it truly is a commitment. Tamadre and I frequently talk about what meeting are we preparing for today, because there are a lot of meetings. So that's not to scare you off from doing it, because there's a good result from this. For example, with getting people engaged and staying engaged, people need to feel like there's something in it for them. So that's why we saw our gaps around domestic violence, and we also saw some gaps around pretrial compliance. And so the DV gaps really helped us engage with some greater stakeholders like DV advocacy groups, Commonwealth Attorney, Victim Witness, because finally we could see where pretrial and those organizations do have a meeting point, even more so than what we're traditionally used to having. And so that was a big deal. The pretrial compliance area that we're working on as well is also a big area for some of our stakeholders in the system, but also our own teams, our own staff. Because there's frustration on our end on how some things happen at the pretrial stage. What happens when someone's not fully compliant at the pretrial stage? What does that mean? So that engaged us to have deeper conversation about, well, what does it mean to have people on pretrial? What is our goal here? And are we seeing a pretrial defendant through a probation lens? Which, we all here do, most of us do both probation and pretrial. How the office is run is really up to the agency or the director, but there is some mixing, and we all know that from a national model, that's not always seen as a best practice, but it is how business is done in Virginia generally, and there's lots of reasons for that. So having people get an opportunity to have a better understanding of that, and then allowing opportunity to engage on where people's frustrations are. And so we've been working, like, for example, on this pretrial compliance work group on a sanctions incentive grid, having direct conversations with the judiciary about when they need to hear from us and when they don't. What does it mean for pretrial compliance to them? Is it a big deal for them if a defendant doesn't do much that they're supposed to do with the pretrial service agency, but yet they're still appearing in court? What does that really mean? So that's a pretty deep conversation, and we were always seeing things through the strictly a probation lens of reducing recidivism and all that, when really, in fact, in pretrial, we have the goal of really just assuring public safety and that people get to court. Made us think differently. And some of us who thought, including myself, who thought they had it all down pat, have learned from this experience. And me, with the many years experience I have, I can still learn. So we've learned a lot from this experience. And then just keeping people engaged is a challenge as well. Initiatives have their wax and wane, you're on, people are on, they're off. Keeping people engaged and attending meetings and having them understand the importance. So engaging in the subcommittees where there is some benefit from them has made a difference. We've established a lot more relationships, I think, because of this initiative. And you've heard this from every panelist today. This is not just about implementing a new risk assessment. This is about true systemic change at the pretrial end of your system.
Okay, thank you. So next question, this is for everyone. What do you see as the benefits of moving from the vPRA praxis model to the PSA release conditions matrix model? Do you want to take that, Wes, from the state perspective? All right, so
since nobody was
tell us a
jumping
little
for
bit
that
about-
one, yeah.
Some of the goals and why we're changing this tool.
Yeah, so I think the conversation that we just had about some of the challenges that were faced, the development and the shift from what the praxis currently recommends and how that framework exists today, and in our state team conversations and meetings about what the release condition matrix is going to look like for Virginia. Those were some challenging conversations to be had, and they were challenging conversations that needed to be had. We've talked a little bit about the change in approach to having an actual recommendation be made. A release condition matrix, it's just that. The release decision has been made. There's no need for a recommendation to be made. The release has occurred. The judge has made that decision. So now it's, okay, so how do we support that individual to make sure they return to court and that they remain arrest-free? And so fundamentally, you're looking at things that we are held to, and Steve mentioned, we're tied to two things: pretrial public appearance back in court, and the public safety. Those are the two things that we have to uphold, and that what we're working towards in a pretrial supervision setting, if you will. And so I think moving to a release condition matrix is going to allow us as a field to have a better opportunity to really put the services back in pretrial services instead of it being pretrial supervision, to where it's, as Ken Rose used to say, prebation. It's not prebation. It's truly about pretrial services. How do we support the individual to make them as likely to succeed as they possibly can, which then in turn, if they're succeeding, the community is succeeding and the system is succeeding. It ties back to the 3 M's. That's the fundamental thing that why we exist. Maximizing a release, first and foremost, maximizing public safety, and maximizing appearance in court. If we can do those things through this tool and in this way, then we're well on our way. And that's where we're continuing to keep those things in our mind as we're developing these tools, having these really fun, robust, challenging conversations as a team. I mean, you've got representatives from all across various parts of our system in these meetings. Having a welcome space to where folks can be heard, can make their point of view, and then having the opportunity to bring them along as you are also being brought along. I mean, everyone on this panel, I think, has talked about the things they have learned throughout this process, myself included. What we're finding out about what pretrial risk means, that is a fascinating conversation that I can't wait to continue to have that. Because what we're talking about here is really success, and the likelihood that these individuals actually do succeed far outweighs how often they fail. So being able to then emphasize that success is where, you know, I'm really excited about this change from the praxis itself into the release condition matrix. And it's going to allow you guys the opportunity to supervise folks when you are supervising them, to manage them a little differently than what you are doing now. So I'll turn it over to Sam. Looks like she's itching to say something.
Well, I was just gonna say, in summary, I guess the benefit is that, and the idea around the benefit is that less is more. So it's going to be less. You're going to have to do less. You're hoping to have less of a physical kind of, not a burden. I don't think we're not trying to be burdens in supervising people, but we're hopefully going to have less of a burden on defendants' lives, individuals' lives, to actually hopefully promote their success. It's less is more. We're trying to promote success instead of managing failure. I think that was Dr. Banks. There you go. I listen. I listen. So it's less is more. Very good.
Which, I mean, we're talking less is more, and the types of conditions that we see placed on individuals in a pretrial setting across Virginia. I mean, across the board, we see things like drug testing in a pretrial setting. What is the efficacy of that? Asking ourselves these questions. What does that really look like? What does that mean? What is it tied to? How does drug testing on pretrial ensure someone coming back to court and that they're not going to incur a new arrest while they're out there? Is it tied to treatment? Is it really tied to benefiting their existence in the community to put them in a position to succeed? Or is it really a surveillance model? And if that's the intent, then I think we all have really hard conversations that we need to have continually as this progresses. What is a condition really there for? These are things that are tied to that person's ability to be released. The judge has already said they're eligible for release. So you're adding conditions to that release. What's the intent of those conditions? And so that's the questions that we have and that we're facing and that we're continuing to discuss, what that looks like, how that's implemented locally, and from the state perspective. The education piece is huge. I think that's the biggest challenge, to be quite honest with you, is your self-education and the continual education of your stakeholders, your system partners, and folks in the community especially, to know what this is not, what it is supposed to be, and what it's intended to be for them and the community around them.
So as a result of this project, what do you see as the top 1 or 2 changes to the services provided by your agency, and why?
Well, I guess from this project, we haven't fully implemented, or we're working on non-compliance guides and compliance guides and drug screening protocols. And all these different things, but we haven't yet implemented them. We haven't actually started to try them out. And so I think the services that we hope to to have with, we're hoping, like I said before, less is more. We're hoping that we, instead of trying to catch people in mistakes, we are trying to hopefully have it be an environment where we want them to go to court, we want them to stay out of trouble, but we also want to help them and not just try to catch them in mistake and put them back in, just have it be one of those mouse wheels. As far as the services, I really hope that is what happens. It makes it more of an efficient, effective, supervision or services that we're going to give, but we haven't actually done them yet because we haven't actually implemented those particular things.
I am in agreement with what Sam has stated. I think, just to piggyback off of what she said, within our agency, we are working on the like a sanctions and incentives matrix. That's going to be very important in streamlining the way we handle violations. And I know this was mentioned before, but how we deal, we'll definitely be dealing more internally with the minor violations, the more, the violations in which individuals, it's more about this person missed an office visit, the technical violations we're going to be dealing with even more internally, and not necessarily, those are things that the judges have kind of told us that they don't need to know, every time somebody doesn't come to the office or even misses a drug test, if we can handle it internally with our interventions, our evidence-based interventions. And then, of course, incentives. We're focusing on incentives because we want to celebrate success. We want to provide our individuals with more supportive services, focusing on their stability factors, because that will lead, hopefully, to their success. So really putting things in place as far as supportive services, and Dr. Banks will be speaking on that here at another workshop. So please, if you haven't already attended a workshop of his on that, it's very enlightening about how important supportive services is in providing those to help the individual be successful. I think that's it. Anybody else?
Oh, for Wes, I'd like to put you in a difficult position again. If you're okay with that?
Let's go.
I think it's been alluded to so far, but the PSA does not include an interview.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about how we see that moving forward and what options there might be for interview or not interview and what that might look like? And
Yeah.
sorry to put you in the spot.
No, that's great. Appreciate the question. It is a tough pickle. We are used to doing interviews. That is who we have been for the iteration of this. And so with that, I will say we don't really know just yet what the interview is going to be, what it's going to look like, how it can be used. It does not require an interview and will not require an interview. So locally, if you decide to do an interview, the questions we all have to ask ourselves, and we are asking ourselves this, what's the point? What is the purpose of the interview then? If it is going to inject bias and subjectivity into the assessment tool itself, that's a dangerous game. And so if this is about early identification of behavioral health, therapeutic dockets, early entry points into those types of diversionary tracks, if you will, there may be some efficacy for the interview in that. So those are things that we're continuing as a state team and in these local teams to continue to discuss and examine what it is that the interview serves to do as a function itself. Is it all about overriding I'm still breaking habits, release condition matrix and judicial decisions? Is it about overriding what the score of a PSA is showing and showcasing to the judge? Or is it really about identifying opportunities for that person's needs to be addressed? And then if that's the intent of an interview, to provide supplemental information to the judge, not tying it to an actual risk factor, because those things are calculated and captured in the risk assessment itself, the PSA. So asking those questions, that's going to be vital as you all move forward in your local teams that you're going to be developing. Having those conversations with your team as to what purpose an interview serves. And that is a very hot button issue, not just one that we face in local teams here, at the state team, but it's a national conversation as well. So if you've been paying attention across the country, this topic has come up as the involvement of our assessment tools that we utilize. And a lot of folks out there, I mentioned, vPRA is adopted across the country in many places. Folks are used to doing interviews. So how do we then move to the next phase of the PSA, and then what role, if any, does an interview actually serve?
Okay. So we have about 4 minutes left, and I'd like to ask a couple questions. We have one final question. Before that, I want to ask one follow-up. So specifically, it is regards to this interview piece, right? And the judges and most of our stakeholders, they love the interview. They love that information. So from my own perspective, I would love to know from the 2 local agencies, how are you explaining this change so far? And how has that gone? We're moving to the PSA, and guess what? We don't know if there's an interview or not. So how has that gone?
I don't know what Sam was going to say, so I'll pass it back over to her. Again, I think that is why you choose your team wisely from the very beginning, from who you choose to be your champion and your team leaders. And again, they have been at the table from the very beginning, so it hasn't been a secret. We've talked about this from the very beginning. However, my guess, and again, we haven't made this decision locally as to if there will be an interview or what the information, whether it'll be supplemental information or what that will look like. But I will say my guess is that the stakeholders would say something different on the front end as far as what they wanted in an interview. It probably wouldn't have looked a lot different than what they had before. But after going through this whole process with even the change in mindset, my guess is that when we do sit down and discuss this, that it's going to be a very different answer than if we would have asked them at the very beginning.
I've got nothing else to add.
And we've kind of danced around the subject a little bit, like we don't know, it's definitely not necessary to have the interview with the PSA, but you all think about the pandemic that we just went through. Wouldn't it have been great to not have to do an interview, because when you didn't have access, some of you didn't have access to the jails, you would have been able to provide the information that the court needed. So no, we haven't really completely gone there. My suspicion is if we do continue to do interviews in some form or fashion, it's going to look a lot different than how it looks now, and the information we're going to be gleaning from it. We're going to be very careful about, one, not biasing anything or using it to override what the tool is providing for us, which has kind of already been said. And so, but we have been having those kinds of conversations and around equity and making sure that we're being fair, because that's what we really need to be about. And so we don't want to create any more problems. But I think again, go back to the trust and where the system stakeholders are, and we do feel like we have some trust built. So we will at least be able to have the conversations, at an equal playing field. And I think whatever we come up with, everyone will be in agreement with. It may change. It may start off with, because a lot of times we do stuff because that's what the court's comfortable with, and some of you may be even thinking, I know if I was out in the audience, I'd be thinking, oh, our court's not going to like that. They're going to have issues with that. And that's how it was when I started as a director in Prince William. It's like, well, the court's not going to like you making those kind of recommendations. And my thought is, well, we're here to give you an unbiased assessment so that you can make a good judicial decision. And it really isn't about what you expect us to say or what we should say. It really is, what's fair and helping you make the best unbiased decision possible. So I know it's not like clear, but that's what piloting is all about. It's trying and learning. So again, I even think what it looks like when we start the pilot, like the interview, if we do an interview, may be different down the road, because it may be starting with some comfort things, because we sometimes do the comfort things to make the stakeholders feel better. I mean, we all, whether you admit it or not, we do this a lot. We've had to do it over the years. We've had to do things we didn't want to do over the years so that they would use pretrial. I remember in the early days of doing things that we didn't think we should be doing. So we'll see. It's a process.
Okay. So I have one final question, and then it's your turn to ask questions. And I do hope we have some questions. What I hear today is we have significant change coming to all of Virginia. And we have 3 brave pilots that have started this process. So this being significant change, I hope there's some questions that some of you have. I have one final question for our panelists. Please keep your answer to 1 or 2 sentences. 1 or 2 sentences. What is the most important thing pretrial service professionals should know to prepare for pretrial advancement implementation? What is the most important thing pretrial service professionals should know to prepare for this implementation?
So one of the most important things, because there's not just one, would be the use of peer champions when making change. Peer meaning, you know, if you have a judge that's a champion of what you're trying to implement, have them speak for you or help you with training. Commonwealth's attorneys, the same thing. You know, magistrate, of course, help and train the assistant and deputy magistrates. That is going to be key, having that support, because if they have their peers in support, then they're more than likely to go along with a change that might be a little hard, but if they have trust, you know, with their peer, then they're more than likely to make the change. It'll be a little more seamless.
And I would just say, lead by example. You can't expect your stakeholders to be open-minded if you are not. You can't expect to get buy-in from them if you haven't bought in yourself. I would say lead by example, stay open-minded, and stay positive.
But those are all good. I'll just repeat something I think I've already said. Being really transparent about the process, about what you know, what you don't know, and just being honest. Just being honest and know that we're learning as we go along, and stakeholders are going to be learning with you as well. And I think that goes a long way to the trust factor.
One thing I would do is, so you're going to ask some questions, and you're going to have judges, you're going to have Commonwealth's attorneys, public defenders, like actual, you know, powerful people in your system. You're going to ask them and question past decisions that they've made. You're going to question. We're trying to change how things are done, essentially, and try to change. And it's almost like you're having them take a look at, well, this was a bad decision, you know, 5 years ago, whatnot. And so it's a tightrope. Use, you know, if you have technical assistance providers, tell them to bring it up. So that really is helpful. But just, I guess, approach everything with, what we know now is you didn't know then, and so you have to make them and your stakeholders, the people that you're working with, understand that this is not about judgment. This is about just new progress, and just they did the best. Everybody's done the best they can with what they know. So just, you know, be patient. It's a process.
And that ties perfectly with what I was going to say, because what you just described is evidence-based. Over time, we've learned so much more about how to do business today than we did 25 plus years ago. And so I'm gonna drop a little quote from NAPSA conference on you guys right now. I went this past year, and this quote stuck with me. It really did. And the gentleman's in the room who made this quote, and he was the recipient of the Pioneer Award for NAPSA this year, and it's Nick Sainer. And he said this, and this is just something I think, because not everyone in this room is a director, right? So not everyone in this room is an officer. They may be the first time ever being here. They may not be a manager, but every one of you are pretrial professionals. And so Nick said this, he said, following the law and evidence-based practices is the least we can do. That's the least we can do as a pretrial professional in our field. That's the starting point. So know what we have to do by law, and then what has the research told us how we're effective in what we actually deliver every day. That's the starting point. And I think that's for everyone and fits all of our roles, respective of your actual day-to-day. That's where we start. And if you can start there and you educate yourself on what that has looked like from the iteration of this instrument way back when until what we're at today and the information that we do know, that's where you start. And that's what I would say.
Okay, so this is an opportunity. There is a tremendous amount of expertise gathered here today and gathered on that panel. So this is your opportunity. Any questions that you would like to ask our panelists? Got a brave hand up over here. Let me hand you the microphone so we can get you recorded.
Since we are a pilot site, how is this going to look as far as PTCC, and will the courts get a report?
You want me to take that? No? It's PTCC at the state level there. So I'll take that question initially, and then maybe you guys can speak about in the interim what that might look like, PSA scoring app and all that. So yeah, the new data system, when it's implemented, will have to incorporate the PSA and any other risk assessment tools that are used on both sides of the fence, probation and pretrial, into it. That's a mandatory, has to. So, and what the report will look like, yeah, it's going to look different. What a judge receives now is basically here's your level, here's your score. This is the level of recommended supervision, and maybe a couple conditions that go along with that if you input those. Nobody knows what that score looks like unless they've gone through training, have a bench guide tool or something along those lines. The PSA scoring app that they'll use is going to show and generate a report that actually tells them, okay, this score means that they're 80% likely to show up back to court and remain arrest-free. That's what the score means. Presents things in a lot different way than that emphasizes the success, which happens, again, more often than failure in all cases. And how that is then received by the judge can be impacted by exactly, you're right, what that report looks like. So that is definitely something that will change. And I don't know if anyone wants to talk about what it looks like today.
Just since you were talking about PTCC and how we're going to do it and logistically, so we got the 3 pilot sites, and Wes is going to talk a little bit about next steps toward the end. But there'll be other sites brought on at some point. So for right now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the Arnold Ventures developed a PSA scoring app. So there is an app that we'll be using to do the score. So those of you that are IT savvy or directors know that nothing gets put on your networks without great scrutiny. So it does take time. You know, we're all 3 pilot sites are working through it with our IT departments, and we're at various stages of it. I mean, it's important for you to know that because that's just part of this implementation process. And honestly, that is kind of difficult as well because, you know, they're very careful about what they allow on the network. So we're working through that now. The scoring app is automatic. This is a tool that cannot be done by pencil and paper. It has to be done in an automated fashion, and that's required and for good reason. But it will be, of course, integrated at some point in a case management system that's of the future, hopefully the near future. But for now, it's the PSA scoring app. And depending on the timing, new sites may have it in the case management, but they may be doing the app like we're going to be doing.
Great question. Do we have any other questions? I see 2.
Actually, I have 3 questions. So what will investigators do if the PSA is completed by a magistrate?
That is a valid question, and one I am not able to answer.
So yeah, that's a future iteration, right? And I hear that. Again, fundamentals of pretrial justice is early decision point impact. Being willing as a field to adapt to what that may mean for us. I can tell you this is not happening today, it's not happening tomorrow. That's a goal. Like, our goal should always be to make the most impact as early as possible in a judicial decision. Because that first decision has massive ripple effects throughout the life of a case. So if that judicial officer, being a magistrate in this case, has this information at their disposal to assess all individuals that come in front of them, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked. Who's doing it? Is that the magistrate? Is there a pretrial investigator, a pretrial assessor in conjunction with the magistrate there at their office to do that tool? There's all sorts of questions that has to be answered about that. So you could be, as an investigator, right alongside at the magistrate or in conjunction with working alongside, providing that to a magistrate. Doesn't necessarily mean you're replaced if that's what you're a little worried about, but it's an earlier entry point and when you're providing that information. It currently, is any Fairfax people here, about you? Okay, don't see anybody. Fairfax does this now with magistrate level informing that decision, providing vpraise already to them. So it exists and it coexists between pretrial practitioners like yourself and a magistrate already. The resource structure ability currently for you all in our current setup has significant challenges to accomplish that today. And that's the part of what when we continue to move forward, these are the things that we should want to solve those problems and bring in alongside those partners like the chief magistrates and things to these conversations. And they've been participating in all of these meetings. They know what this tool can be for them and for the rest of the system. So yeah, great question.
Okay, second question. How would financials be completed if we're not doing an interview with somebody? Because a lot of judges rely on us to do financials.
All right. So I think that's a fantastic question to be explored locally, right? So if that is by code at least in the duties and responsibilities in Virginia, that's a secondary optional function of a pretrial officer role. That's not done everywhere. Not everyone in Virginia provides that level of information to the court. This has come up in a conversation in our state team meetings about if we do have interviews locally, could that be a function to provide that indigent information to the courts and to the judges in a more timely manner, if that could be part of that. So that is something we're looking at.
Okay, and number 3, how will the levels be scored of supervision for pretrial with this new placement?
RCM levels of supervision. What are the new levels for supervision? You guys want to talk about differences?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so there is instead of a level 3 supervision now with the praxis is meeting weekly, and so the most we would be meeting with somebody would be biweekly, and it's I do believe it's just levels 1, 2, and 3. The monitoring is out, but yeah. So just like I was saying before, we're trying everything at the state level. Is less is more. The actual praxis, you're not going to be seeing people as often. But also at the local level with your when you go over the non-compliance, the compliance law guides, that also addresses when we do see people, how we're engaged with them, how we actually do our supervision. Less is also more. So we will be drug screening less. A compliance, if somebody, it's based on timing. If after 60 days somebody does well enough, we'll knock them down another supervision level. So if that's what you're asking, the most that we'll see people is biweekly, but the weekly visits will not. It's not a part of the new release conditions matrix.
Great questions. Do we have any other questions?
So what is the timetable for the statewide implementation of this tool?
Great question. Wish I could give you a firm answer to that, right? So here's the picture with where we're heading. So implementation, these guys have mentioned they're almost there. They're fine-tuning locally. The RCM, the release condition matrix, we just pushed that out to finalize that product. The violent offense list and the Virginia offense list integration into the scoring app, that just took place. Their ability to start launching is right around the corner. So up until now, this has been all sort of the implementation process development work at the state level and locally to really lay the framework for things that you guys in the next iteration would not necessarily have to walk through that step by step locally, especially as it relates to the release conditions matrix. There's a long process to develop that information, which is changed significantly from praxis, meaning praxis recommended lots of people to supervision. The assigned levels that prompt supervision today may look a little different than what they have historically. Again, realizing pretrial risk concepts, what does that mean? Who are the individuals that need and could have the most impact and to increase their likelihood to succeed? We need to tailor our resources to those individuals, and that net widening concept of having a blanket surveillance model to where send everybody to pretrial so we know what's happening with that individual. Like combating against some of that is what the RCM is hoping to do. And so time frame, they're starting. There's going to obviously need to be some analysis of their impacts and their progress. So we're looking for these guys here in the next quarter to start locally, to have that evaluation process locally and from our level, DCJS, and then from that point forward, be opening up to the field. The rest of you guys to express, one, local interest from you all, letters of intent, that sort of thing, and then a readiness assessment as we're developing that tool to see, are you ready to start this process with the PSA? So you're looking in the next 6 months for you guys to really start implementing locally there, but there's plenty you can do right now to start the process.
Thank you. I think I saw Amanda, maybe with one question? All right.
Nice, okay.
Any other questions?
Was it-
We're recording, so we need to get you on the mic, sorry.
So I just want to make sure that I'm absolutely clear. The VPRAY and the Praxis is no longer going to exist, and now we're going to have the PSA matrix model that we're going to use? That's how, it's just going to go out?
Eventually, yes, but not all at once. If that, there's a next phase. So we're expanding, I think it's 10 sites is our goal. If we're going to have 10 additional sites to begin this. So these two things are going to coexist for a little while.
Oh, okay.
So if you are not quite ready to launch this initiative formally, then you don't have to necessarily do that right away. We want you guys to really think about, is this a tool and a viable option for you? But we also recognize, you've just heard today that this is a lot of groundwork that you need to groundswell support around you for this implementation project. So I don't think it would be the best way to move forward to just here today and go ahead, move forward. You've got us telling you what all we've done. Now it's time to move forward. It's not going to happen overnight in that way.
Yeah, so we've been working on this. Our kickoff meeting was July 15th, 2022, and we've been meeting monthly. And this entire time, we're continuing to use the VPRAY. We use the VPRAY now. We use the Praxis. So that is still definitely a part of what we do. And then once we get the app up, I think we might then include the PSA to our stakeholders, but that's still to be decided. But we're still very much doing the VPRAY and the Praxis.
We have time. One more question. Last one. It'll be brilliant.
So I heard someone mention conditions matrix, and I was just curious what an ideal one looks like, and if that's at all dependent on what localities can provide, like supportive services and things like that. Not to get too far in the weeds, but I just wanted some clarification.
Talk about your system mapping.
Yep. Well, yeah.
Well, the release condition matrix is similar to the Praxis, and then it's going to establish for us the frequency of contacts with the individual, based on their risk level. So as far as supportive services, I do think that's probably going to be more locally driven in what's available. We haven't talked a lot about this today, and like Tamadri said, Dr. Banks does do a presentation on it, but we have really switched to quite a model of identifying what's available in our community and being more focused on what people need. We're developing updated resource directory that we're working collaboratively in our jurisdiction, that it's going to be available maybe on the county's website, because everybody's developing a resource directory, right? So it's better to have it streamlined, so we're working to do that. So it is totally locally dependent on what your locality can provide. But this is a switch. A lot of things you've heard today is a switch to how we see management of pretrial cases. There was a time when we would not talk about, quote unquote, helping people when we were in that purist pretrial phase of our pretrial work, which was maybe 15, 20 years ago. Now we are looking at what can we do, not to mandate services necessarily, because we're not about adding more mandated things that people could fail on. We want to just give people what they need to be successful. I hope that helps.
Just to piggyback off of what Steve mentioned, not mandating. We're giving the judges, the judicial officers, an idea of what's available in the locality, like Steve mentioned. So it will have to be tailored to each locality. We definitely do not want to encourage judges to necessarily mandate supportive services. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
That was a great way for the final question. Caitlin, thank you. So we have about 3 to 5 minutes, Wes. What I've heard so far is the importance of collaboration. I have heard that this is a system change in terms of this implementation. It's agency, it's state. And I have heard that this is about pretrial services, not about pretrial supervision. So we've alluded to, and everybody's interested, and I'm sure concerned and interested about next steps. What can agencies do now to get prepared for this implementation?
Perfect transition. So what can you do now? And this is, again, speaking to everybody in the audience that has a hand in pretrial services. If you're not all the director necessarily, you might not always be the ones, you might not be the team champion or team lead in your local project, but you're impacted by it. So first thing you can do is enhance your knowledge. There are folks out there that this is what they do. Their mission is to increase our understanding of the best practices today over time. Folks like NIC, National Institute of Corrections, APPR, you've heard us talk about them and their support, and throughout this entire project, constant and continual information sessions, ongoing research being developed and published on a regular basis. Take advantage of the APPR community. If you haven't signed up for that, please let me know if you would like to be included in the Virginia Learning site so you can learn more about those. I can grant you that access, but you also, everybody, can have access to the APPR community at large, which is a fantastic forum with lots of questions. Sam has been having good conversations this week with folks across the country about how they do business. And learning from other people is a fantastic tool to increase our knowledge. So what can you do now? Educate yourself and then begin to be proactive in the next steps in your education. So anybody here NAPSA certified as a pretrial service professional? Thank you guys for that. I would encourage you, if you have not done that, what's stopping you? Take advantage of that opportunity to become a certified true pretrial professional in the work that you do. NAPSA conferences, NAPSA even accreditation exists for your local agency. If you're wanting to strive beyond the minimum standards of this, and that's sort of where we're heading, is the ideal system. And that's where NAPSA strives to do with their mission, is to promote those ideal standards for what we do each and every day. So participate not just here in Virginia conferences, but I highly encourage you guys to get involved nationally. Attend these really awesome conferences that they put on every year. I see some of you that were there are nodding. I see them. So talk about your experiences with your peers, about what that means. If you don't come back from NAPSA with a little bit more energy to your work, then I wonder if you were at the workshops and actually at the event. Take advantage of those opportunities. And that's a proactive thing for anyone in this room, all the way from top down and bottom up. Begin engaging with your stakeholders. Sort of, I think Megan spoke about it. If you haven't necessarily bought in, it's going to be a tough sell to everyone else around you. And part of being bought in is really understanding what it is you're trying to be bought in about. So that first piece of education, and then it equips you guys to then begin the conversations with those folks in your local systems. So maybe the natural starting point, and these guys talk about it, your CCJBs. And if you have a functioning CCJB that meets regularly and is engaged, that's a very good place to start. Should that be an area of challenge and opportunity to improve upon? Yeah, maybe there are players in the CCJB that you can leverage to be those peer champions that Tamandre talked about. Maybe it's not so much you having the conversation, but allowing other experts in that specific area to then engage with other folks in that area of work. And so begin to talk about this now. Please don't wait. Please don't wait. Strengthen that pretrial services specific culture. Again, we've heard it mentioned many times in this panel this morning, or I guess afternoon, about pretrial services, the service back into that. And so really enhancing what we are doing every single day, every single meeting. What does that meeting look like? You may meet very often with individuals, but is that meeting impactful? Is it a worthwhile use of that individual's time out of their day to come speak to you? And if you are, if that's an area of opportunity, then yeah, begin to have this a service-based culture. Sam spoke about that. I mean, less is more potentially, but also maybe the type of contact we have when that person does come to see us can be even more impactful. And then finally, assemble your team. Find those team champions and team leads out there. It doesn't have to be and shouldn't always be a pretrial services agency director as your team lead and team champion. Maybe there's someone else in this room that isn't wearing that hat, but is all about this business and wants to see the best for their community, and maybe that's your opportunity to grow as an individual as well as within your local systems. And it may also mean branching outside of your scope of influence in just the day-to-day. Often we get very, very easily caught up into the things that swirl around us in our offices every day, but we also realize that there are other champions that experience the same individuals in multiple different entry points across the system that come in contact with very similar folks that we are dealing with every day, and maybe they understand this just as well, and can they be your champion in this? Whether that's a judge, chief judge in your area, in your local courts who know about this, and this is an area for them, identifying those people and really is starting to really assemble the Avengers on this squad. This is your team. Fight the fight and continue to push forward as we move ahead into this next iteration of our assessments in Virginia and pushing for pretrial advancement.
Okay. One quick housekeeping. Please fill out your evaluation. Conference committee painstakingly looks at all of those. I'm going to volunteer Mr. Paul, our wonderful conference co-chair, to maybe help me collect those at the door when you're done. And before that, can we get a loud round of applause for our experts today for their time? I'm also going to volunteer our experts. I'm sure they'll be milling around conference, so I think if you have some further questions, just want to talk, I'm sure, knowing them all, that any of them would be happy to talk to you about the process and any concerns. Hopefully so anyway. Thank you all for coming to this session. Really appreciate your time, and a huge thanks to our panelists.